Welcome back to Social Protection Week and our conference here live from the ILO's headquarters in Geneva. The high-level conference has just wrapped up and the rest of this week is going to be devoted to in-depth technical discussions. But let's focus quickly on some of today's highlights. This morning, Professor Jeffrey Sachs delivered a powerful and direct keynote speech on the need and affordability of universal social protection. He then joined a panel to discuss the issue of social protection financing. I spoke to him about these issues and we were joined by one of his panelist colleagues, Professor Jayati Ghosh. Hello and welcome back. With me I have Jayati Ghosh, Professor at Nehru University in India, and Professor Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University, both here to attend Social Protection Week and the Conference on Social Protection. Thank you both very much for joining us. Let's start with a key question. Pretty much everybody here is convinced that more social protection is a good thing, but it's not happening. What is the problem? Is it the money? Is it the political will? Jyoti.
I think it's absolutely the political will. I mean, the whole point is that it's always presented as something that governments can't afford, especially in poor countries. But it's never actually pointed out that it's relatively easy to raise the tax revenues that are required. And in situations like we have today, where there's so much excess capacity and unemployment, just spending the money by the government would generate more economic activity and would actually result in multiplier effects that give it more tax revenues. So a lot of it would actually fund itself. It's hugely a problem of political will.
Would you agree?
The world's easily rich enough for every person on the world to have their economic needs met, including social protection. The political will fails in two ways. One is within countries. The rich dominate politics typically, and they leave the poor desperately behind. And second, for some very poor countries, they need help from abroad. And the rich countries are absolutely irresponsible in their failure to help the poorest countries in the world. Not only is development aid far below target and far below what is needed, but also the rich countries have rigged the international tax system to enable massive tax evasion, massive tax fraud, tax havens, and so forth. And so when you put the two together, the poor countries do not have what they need in order to be able to achieve social protection, both because they can't collect the revenues from the multinational companies who are cheating, and also because the development assistance long promised is so stingy in its delivery that it's shocking.
One of the things that was pointed out in the global report on the future of work was that we have got used to a financial system and a business system where we measure returns every 3 months, quarterly business returns. And yet social protection takes longer than that to deliver its results. Do you think that mindset is an issue?
The mindset is an issue not just for social protection, but for the very future of this planet. Because all of the things we need to do to save humanity, including all the huge investment pushes that we're going to need to deal with climate change and to deal with the catastrophes that we've done to the environment, all of these are medium to long term in their effects. So yes, we have to have societies and governments who are much more willing to think about the medium and long term. That's absolutely the case. In the case of social protection, I don't even think the effects are so long term. We've seen in so many societies that actually enabling most people to live a decent and dignified life has very positive economic effects. It leads to what has been called a bubbling up of economic growth rather than the trickle down that just doesn't work.
What do you see would be the main benefits and delivered over what period of time of a more effective social protection system delivered to the very poorest?
You know, I would say that there are a number of things that have to be in place in any civilized society, not just the poorest. Universal pensions, state-funded rather than contributory, universal child welfare coming in the form of both subsidies and grants for children, as well as provision of all the basic childcare publicly provided and affordable, a whole range of health protection, Again, largely publicly provided, so you avoid all the asymmetries of information that exclude people. So if you provide these minimum 3 things, you're already enabling people to actually have the effective demand to go out there and buy other things. Markets can recover. We are in a global situation of massively inadequate demand. And you are enabling an immediate recovery if you simply ensure that you're doing what is also ethically and morally correct.
How are we going to pay for this? The ILO report that's out today is talking of an amount of 500 billion a year. Now, in anybody's money, that's a lot. How do we fund it?
Well, it's actually not a lot when you consider that the world economy is $100 trillion. These are actually very small sums compared to the world income. And much of this can be funded out of normal budget revenues as long as this broken international tax system is repaired to stop all of the evasion and abuse, as long as governments have the will to collect more and are not under the control of their plutocratic elites telling them cut our taxes, don't help the poor, and if there is a degree of international solidarity. That's why ILO is so important in this. This is a global organization that calls for global solidarity. It's reminding us that these social protections were promised back in 1948 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These are basic human rights. We're rich enough to meet them. The ILO report is extremely helpful. It's calling for a new financial mechanism, a social protection fund globally. I want to do what I can to help promote ILO's initiative, because if we pool resources, fix the broken international tax system, and lean on our governments to stop their plutocratic tendencies, we'll be able to provide the economic needs for every person on this planet.
But are you suggesting that it should be financed through some kind of ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, or should it be through domestic tax spending? Because a lot of developing countries don't really have the systems in place to get a comprehensive tax and indeed social protection system to administer that.
The answer is both. For the poorest countries, they need help from outside. For the lower middle income and upper middle income countries, they can largely do this out of their own resources. And in any case, you don't have the systems in place until you have the determination to do it, and you raise the revenues and build the systems in tandem, like you do any major project. So it's not really a mystery how to do this. It is political will, as we've both been saying, and the political will has to involve both the national politics and the global solidarity.
But it's not, among donor countries, donors like to give money for big physical things, to build a hospital, to build a school, one-off projects. It's less popular to give money every year to run a system. How do we get over that?
Well, I would say that let's begin by asking the donor countries to do genuine tax cooperation. Jeff has been talking about the global broken tax system. If we actually bring into place a unitary system of taxing multinationals. At the moment, multinationals are getting away with almost no tax because they shift their profits around and they do this base erosion stuff. If we have a global system where the multinational is taxed as one company, and then those taxes are distributed according to a minimum tax in all the countries where they operate, that already gives a whole bunch of developing countries access to much more tax revenues. For example, if we also bring in a wealth tax, not a very large one even, 1%, 2% on the very, very richest. You're enabling the richest in the world to actually pay what all of us pay all the time in terms of our own property taxes and so on. And that, but you have to have global cooperation for that. You can't have the US and the UK and a bunch of other developed countries allowing tax havens within their own jurisdictions. So I would say, yes, sure, donor countries, but before they are donor, they also are neighbors, and they are countries in a community of nations. They have a responsibility to ensure the cooperation that will enable all countries to get their own resources.
If you put 1% wealth tax on the billionaires, that's $100 billion collected from people who can afford vastly more than that. They have $10 trillion of wealth. And one should remember my own country, the United States. We're spending $700 billion on the military. We've spent trillions of dollars on stupid, useless, destructive wars. And then we're cutting development aid. It's mind-boggling how wrong it is just to be a militarized empire as opposed to a contributing country. That's really the essence of all of this. There's no problem finding the resources if there's a will to do it. Mr. Trump, stop the wars, pay to help people survive. This is so evident, so obvious, but why is Mr. Trump calling for canceling development aid? This is the mystery of U.S. politics. It's not quite a mystery, it's the plutocracy of U.S. politics.
Okay, we have to wind up quickly, but one final comment from you both. If you were going to create a social protection system in a hypothetical developing country, which component would you start with?
Universal pensions at half the minimum wage.
I like the ILO program, which is focusing on pensions, on disability, on children, on mothers. The whole point of ILO is don't ask the question which of the four. We can afford social protection, which we've promised to all. So let's do it.
I agree with that.
I know you do.
Thank you both. Thank you for dodging my final question.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your contribution. That was Professor Jeffrey Sachs and Professor Jayati Ghosh speaking to me earlier today. Now, when it comes to social protection, in addition to the ILO's policy work and its conferences, we also have a lot of on-the-ground work. In many countries, projects that seek to improve different aspects of social protection. These projects are an important reminder of the real practical difference that social protection can make to ordinary people's everyday lives. So we're going to take a look now at one example in Mongolia.
The birth of their first baby brought great joy to Batjav and his wife. The couple are goat herders living in Mongolia's countryside. Soon after the baby was born, Mr. Batjav left home to make a claim for government maternity benefits for his wife.
За би одоо эхнэрийнхээ ихийн халамжийн мөнгийг хөөцөлдөх сая өдөрөөс орж ирлээ л дээ. Манай эхнэр минь одоо сая өнгөрсөн 7 хоногт амрагдсан. Тэгээд амарчхаас өмнө манай эхнэр ч одоо улсад ажиллаж байхдаа одоо нийгмийн халамжийн 3 хамжийг төлдөг байсан сар тухай. Тэгээд төлдөг болохоор одоо энэ жирэмсэн эхчүүд ч одоо 4 сартай тэнцэхгүй мөнгөн одоо тэтгэмжийг олгод юм байна.
After filling in a few forms and handing over documents, Mr. Batjav got a benefits card. The process was fast and easy, but that wasn't always the case. Mongolia is one of the most sparsely populated countries in the world. In the past, Mongolians often had to travel a long way and visit several government offices to claim benefits. It was particularly hard for herders like Batjav, who lived in remote rural areas and had livestock that can't be left for long. So even though Mongolia has a fairly good social security system, more than 80% of herders, self-employed people, and informal economy workers didn't have adequate income security. To tackle the problem, the Mongolian government introduced one-stop shops, or OSS services, in 2007. Help was given by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. The OSS gathers together a number of government ministries and offices in one venue. From there, they can offer a range of services such as social welfare, social insurance, employment, and civil registration. The scheme helps claimants access public services more quickly and efficiently.
Тэгээ одоо энэ нэгцгийн үйлчлэгээ одоо нэвтэрснээр бол одоо бидний ажилд бол их хурдан бүтэж байна. Тэгээд сэтгэл их хангалуун байна.
All Mongolia's аймагs or provinces now have OSS offices. Since first establishment in 2007 until September 2011, more than 3.8 million customers visited the one-stop shops. More than 2/3 were women.
Баянгор аймгийн хувьд 2011 оноос хойш аймгийн эсгэг даргын хамгаалгын газар шивсаар хөгжлийн агенттай хамтран нэгдсгийн үйлчлэгээ төслийг л хэрэгжүүлж ирсэн юм аа. Нэг газраас нэгдсгийн үйлчлэгээ үзүүлээд эхэлж байгаа учраас иргэд бол энийг мэддэг болсон. Бүгд тэрлөө очиод хурдан шуурхай үйлчлүүлээд өөрсдийнхөө одоо хэрэгцээтэй мэдээллийг аваад лавлгаагаа аваад бүх одоо сүлжээг энэ нэгдсгийн үйлчлэгээр аваадсан учраас бүх төрлийн үйлчлэгийг эндээс хүрэх болцоонд бүрдэж байгаа. Энэгээрээ бол одоо энэ нэгдсгийн үйлчлэгээ юмд иргэд хүрэх талдаа их шуурхай, хүн сурталгүй, чирэгдэлгүй юм болж цаг зав нь хэмнэхэд бол ихэнх тус төхөмтэй ажил болж байна гэж үзэж байгаамаа.
The government has also launched mobile OSS services. This means government officers from different departments take services right to the door. More than 600 people have already benefited from this. Other Southeast Asian countries are now interested in following Mongolia's example of coordinated social welfare service delivery. To help them, the International Labour Organization, with support from the ILO Japan Multilateral Program, launched a project helping Mongolia and the ASEAN countries exchange experiences. As a result of visiting Mongolia and learning about the scheme there, the Cambodian government is piloting social service delivery mechanisms in 2 of its provinces. Indonesia will be expanding the single window approach to all its provinces. Thai representatives were particularly interested in the decentralized approach for public services, and the government is now discussing using this to improve coordination and delivery. Single window services are an important element in the successful implementation of social protection floors.
That was a quick look at some of the ILO's work on social protection in Mongolia. Now, I'm pleased to be joined by Valerie Schmidt, who is officer in charge of the ILO's Social Protection Department, and Fabio Duran Valverde, who is the ILO's head of research on financing social protection. Well, welcome to you both, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us.
And congratulations on the conference that has just closed. You must be very pleased that it went off so well.
Yeah, it was an amazing event.
And now you have 2 days of technical discussions to look forward to as well, to get into the nitty-gritty, yeah?
Yes, the nitty-gritty of financing and also on the future of social protection.
Okay, so now the film that we've just seen really focuses on the human impact of social protection. And I think, Valerie, that you were actually working in Asia when that project was underway, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I was covering a number of countries in Asia, including Mongolia, but also we did a lot of work in Indonesia and Cambodia, in many countries actually in the region, in Vietnam, etc. And we can see already with this type of conferences where all the countries come, ministers from different regions, different countries, that really, social protection is progressing, and many countries have really are on the path to achieving universal coverage.
And what was notable about that story from Mongolia is that other countries came to see how Mongolia had done it. A country with comparatively few resources, and yet they became a model.
Yeah, well, they had a national policy to finance social protection by redistributing resources from the mining sector, actually. And so this was a very innovative way of financing social protection on a broad base. And also what was interesting in Mongolia is that they had implemented a single window service approach to ensure that people in the rural areas, and I think the film is about rural communities, can really access all the different social services and social transfers that are available to them. And so I think these 2 elements on financing social protection and how you can make a political will a reality through a real implementation are really striking features of the social protection system in Mongolia.
And are there any other country-level projects that you think are particularly notable?
Oh, there are many. When we were in Cambodia, for instance, we have started supporting the development of health insurance, national health insurance system that is now up and running. This is just an example, but there are many projects, and we have a beautiful digital map now that shows you for each country I think we have 45 countries on the digital map. The situation in terms of social protection, what is the coverage, what are the expenditure, what is the financing gap, and then what are the plans of the government to really expand coverage and improve the access to social protection, and then what is the ILO doing, what are the UN partners doing to really move towards universal social protection.
Okay, that's great. Let's go back to the conference now, and I'd like to ask you both, what for you personally were the key takeaways? And let me start with you, Fabio.
Thank you. Well, I think it's a very interesting conference. I learned a lot from the conference. I would say for me, the main takeaway is the idea that financing the gaps in social protection is feasible. The world has the capacity to finance the gap, so we know that this is feasible, and the question is if there is the political will to do it.
Valerie, what were the takeaways for you?
So I think, yes, what Fabio is saying is the main takeaway. What was also very interesting, I think, is that there was a very high-level representation with Amina Mohamed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, that really sent a message, Michelle Bachelet, Peter Salama from WHO, Guy Ryder, CEOs of enterprise, workers and employees representatives, and many ministers from many different countries. So the main takeaway for me is that there is a global recognition that social protection is not a cost, that it's an investment in people, and this is very important for the human-centered approach to the future of work that we are promoting at the ILO, an investment in social peace, an investment in the economic development, and that, as Fabio mentioned, the other takeaway is that there is of course a huge gap in financing, which explains partly why there is a huge gap in coverage. Today 4 billion people are not covered by social protection, and we estimate we have, and Fabio will present that, we have prepared a study to explain what is the financing gap for social protection, and today we learned from Jeffrey Sachs and from Jayati Ghosh and from many others, including the IMF, that closing this gap is possible.
Okay, Fabio, that moves us neatly on to the new report which you published at the start of this conference. I think that gave a figure of $500 billion a year for achieving universal social protection. Can you give a few more details?
Yeah, this is, I would say, the main figure of this report. This, in fact, is big money. But if you compare the gap with the GDP of developing countries, it's just 1.6% of GDPs of these developing countries. So the conclusion is that this is feasible. Another important conclusion of this report, finding and conclusion of the report, is regarding the how the gap is distributed between developing middle-income countries and low-income countries. Most of the gap is concentrated in middle-income countries, which is, in some extent, means that it's feasible for most of these countries to close the gap based on domestic resources, so through fiscal space options. The main problem and the main challenge is with low-income countries, because now we know from this study that for low-income countries the gap represents about 45% of their carbon tax burden, and so the conclusion is that in this case massive ODA is needed to close the gap.
So how are we going to do that? I mean, traditional ODA is probably unlikely to be able to plug that gap. We're going to need new options for financing.
Well, first of all, in terms of the ODA, I think another result of the study is we measure, for example, how this gap for low-income countries, which is $27 billion, represents of the GDP of high-income countries, is practically insignificant. We are talking about a figure of 0.05% of the GDP of the high-income countries, so it's practically nothing. Now, in the case of the middle-income countries, the situation is totally different. We see that they have the capacity through innovative options, as you mentioned. For example, fighting international illicit financing flows. For example, taxing corporations. For example, taxing the digital economy. So we are discussing of many innovative ways of creating fiscal space.
Yeah. I mean, some of the ideas we heard around the conference room were things like new methods of taxing multinational corporations, some kind of transaction taxes. But presumably for these kind of ideas, the ILO is going to need to work in partnership with new and traditional partners like the OECD to get these ideas, to get them some traction. So you're going to have to build up your partnerships, yeah?
Yeah, I think the conference is clear on the need for solidarity in two ways. At the national level, we need solidarity at the national level, meaning that more people need to contribute to social security, and we need to work also on the extension of contributory social security to the informal economy, which is a huge reservoir to increase the fiscal space. And this is one part of the solution. The other part is to complement this national efforts, domestic efforts, with international solidarity that should not be focused only on millions, meaning some side money to facilitate the development of social protection systems, but on billions. And here we need to find where the billions are, and the billions we know where they are. And so the idea is that through this partnership, we have been working, discussing with the IMF, with Jeffrey Sachs, with Jayati Ghosh, with many people. So all these people were here today in this room, and you could see the willingness to really advance in that direction. So we are going to work starting from next week actually, on this all together, and to try to find a solution that will be also global.
Okay, just to wrap up very briefly, next steps, Fabio.
Well, I would say the first, in terms of the work we can do from here, is to continue studying and researching on this. This is fundamental to understand the challenges in practical terms that we face. And the other, I would say, is we are discussing how to finance these gaps, in particular for low-income countries. So we have been talking about the creation of some kind of mechanism, like an international fund, a global fund for financing the benefit, the implementation and the benefits in low-income countries. So we have to continue working on this.
Valerie, and you, what do you think?
The next steps is building the future of social protection, and this is what we are going to discuss actually starting from tomorrow, and also next year with the recurrent discussion at the International Labour Conference on social protection, social security. So the next steps are twofold. One is to close the financing gap, and so for that we need to work at national level and at the global level. And second, to work on solutions to adapt social protection to the new challenges that it has to face, if we really want social protection to remain relevant in people's lives. Thank you.
Valerie and Fabio, thank you very much for your inputs. A lot of food for thought, work still to be done, but very much a feeling that this is an idea whose time has come, I think. And thank you very much for joining us. That brings us to the end of this daily show associated with the Social Protection Conference. As Valerie and Fabio said, there will be now some days of technical discussions, but we will leave that to the experts who will move from the why of social protection into the nitty-gritty of the how. So from us all here at ILO headquarters in Geneva, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.